Welcome everyone to today's session. And in this session, we are going to be looking at limiting government powers or giving a libertarian approach to limiting governments. And we are going to delve into the fundamental principles of limited government and explore its significance in political theory and examine how these ideas can be applied in real world context, with the goal of ensuring that we are able to at least speak out or voice out our ideas generally through op-eds or through writing. Now, the concept of limited government is pivotal in understanding the balance between government authority and individual liberty. Because ideally, it's about constraining the powers of the state to generally prevent the encroachment on personal freedoms while still maintaining order and security within the society. Now, in this session, we'll not only discuss the theoretical underpinnings of limited government, but also explore practical applications, including how, again, you can use these ideas to craft persuasive op-eds, um, you know, shaping public discourse and advocating for positive change. Now, in defining terms, when we are defining what limited government is, we are saying that it is a system in which the government powers is restricted by law, usually in a written constitution. But ideally, what is this? What we're saying is that most of the time, limited government is closely associated with constitutions and constitutionalism. And of course, we know that a constitution is the aggregate of fundamental principles or established precedents that constitute the legal basis uh, of an organization or any other type of entity, and commonly determines how that entity is to be governed, in this case, like the government or like a country. And then constitutionalism is a compound of ideas, attitudes, and patterns of behavior, elaborating the principle that the authority of government derives from, and it's most of the time limited by a body of fundamental law. And in this case, what we are saying is that limited government is a theory of governance in which the government has only those powers delegated to it by law, often through a constitution, which we all know. So a government authority is generally in this case prescribed and restricted by all these laws, and individual rights are protected against government intrusion in the availability of a constitution. And as a system in which the powers of government are restricted by law, if it's the idea that governmental authorities should be limited to specific functions and should not intrude excessively into the lives of individuals. In the context of Africa, where we have seen many a times, many nations are currently even grappling with issues of governance and individual freedoms. Understanding the concept of limited government becomes even more crucial, because by being able to recognize the importance of the constraints on governmental powers, so societies can just generally strive for a delicate balance between state authority and generally achieve individual autonomy. Now, mentioning Africa, we have witnessed instances where the government have overstepped their bounds, now leading to the infringements on basic rights and freedoms. And ideally, most of the time, there's been a lot of outcry. People have protested. There've been you know demonstrations, whether they have virtual protests or just actual ones. There's been people actually coming out to go against the decisions that certain government officials or certain governments are, taking. And so, limited government or having a limited government serves as a safeguard against, such abuses of power, and ensures that individuals retain their inherent liberties, even in the face of government action. Now, as a primer, we are going to be working with libertarianism. And ideally, in this case, we want to explore libertarianism as a political philosophy that is closely aligned with the principles of limited government, because at its core, libertarianism champions for individual liberty. It also champions for free markets and minimal government intervention in both personal and economic affairs. And by that, it emphasizes, on individual liberties, and it emphasizes on free markets, and also on minimal government interventions. And what we are looking at here is ideally what ideally, what are these things that, when we're beginning to speak about limited government, what is that which is the primer? And in this case, it's libertarianism, because it ideally emphasizes on individual liberty, free markets, and minimal government intervention. The sense that the government is only able to do what they should be doing, or what they can do as stated by the constitution, or as mandated by the constitution. And in this case, we have, natural rights, which are, individuals in this case have inherent rights that cannot be taken away by anyone whatsoever. And that free market is, an economic system that should be guided by the laws of supply and demand. And at the end of the day, we are able to do away with cronyism and, things of the sort, and that our property rights as individuals, we are able to have the right to own and use property as we see fit, so long as we own them. And our individual responsibility to each other is that we should always be responsible for our own actions and decisions. Now, in the African context, where entrepreneurship and individual initiatives are crucial for economic development, libertarian ideas resonate deeply because they are able to promote economic freedom and reduce bureaucratic barriers. They are able to reduce limited government, not generally, not limit, but they're able to reduce bureaucratic barriers. And at the end of the day, limited government gets to pave the way for innovation, prosperity, and upward mobility. Because if the government does what it's supposed to do, and if the government is able to offer a conducive environment for people to live, for people to do business, for people to just engage in the activities they want to engage in every day, then of course there's going to be room for innovation, there's going to be room for prosperity, and there's going to be room for upward mobility. Because if you look at the case of entrepreneurs in countries like Kenya or Nigeria, who often face bureaucratic hurdles and stifling regulations, such as what it takes to ideally have a business fully functional in relation to the registration process. You need a business permit, you need a certificate of incorporation. Then now there's taxes, and then there's increased amounts of rents and all. And just to be able to attain certificate, for some it takes long. It also takes a lot of money for you to be able to just put down or just have a running business. And so by embracing libertarian principles of limited government, these individuals or people in Kenya or Nigeria who want to start business or businesses can advocate for reforms that unleash their entrepreneurial potential and drive economic growth and prosperity. And so in this case, the role of the government becomes to ideally not what we all know, which is asking the government for jobs, telling the government that the youths are jobless and the government needs to, employ them. Because at the end of the day, the government doesn't have money. It is the money that the government gets from us through taxes that it gets to pay all these people. And so when we are asking the government to give people jobs, Then, in other words, we are trying to ask the government to continue taxing us more so that these people can get paid. But ideally, what what we should be doing instead is to remind the government to be able to offer a conducive environment for us to operate, to be able to offer conducive environment for businesses to flourish, to continue offering a conducive environment for people to be themselves. And so the government's fundamental role in a libertarian framework includes protecting individual rights, enforcing contracts, providing for national defense, and ideally providing a conducive environment for its citizens to, um, uh, conduct their businesses and to go about their day. But then, what is the historical context of a limited government? And we want to look at how have historical figures contributed to the development of limited government concepts. Now, the concept of a limited government has deep historical roots. It dates back to ancient civilizations and further developed during the Enlightenment period. The earliest use of the term limited government dates back to King James, um, uh, the sixth, and all the way in the late century. And the scholar Stephen Scalte argues that although Aristotle never developed principles and tactics of constitutionalism, his political philosophy in some ways anticipated the idea of limited government primarily as a tool for limiting civic distrust and enhancing stability. And thinkers like John Locke and laid the groundwork for modern theories of limited government, and they emphasize the importance of checks and balances to be able to prevent tyranny and protect individual liberties. And John Locke, as a liberal philosopher, was a very important theorist of liberal government. And, writing in his two treatises of government, Locke reasoned that men living in a state of nature would voluntarily join in a social contract, forming, a commonwealth or a government per se. And he further says that, or he further reasons that the powers of the government have to be or had to be restricted not only to what the people allowed it no had to be restricted to um, what the people allowed it to do. So the government was only supposed to do that which the people allowed it to do. And he cited four specific limitations on government powers. So his first limitation specified that governments could only govern according to promulgated established laws, and that all people were equal under the law, regardless of their material or social status. And also, his second limitation held that laws could only be designed in the name of the common good. Uh, and with the third one being that he repeated the principle of no taxation without representation. And ideally, he was arguing that people should no, not people ideally, but governments must not raise taxes on the property of the people without the consent of the people given by themselves or their deputies. So, for the government to raise taxes on the properties, there needed to be representation of the people or the people that they've been that they have deputized. And finally, Locke argued in his fourth limitation that the legislature could not delegate lawmaking authority to any other power without the people's consent. And when you look at it in Africa, where the legacy of colonialism continues to shape political institutions, the principles of limited government offer, valuable insights for promoting good governance and safeguarding democratic freedoms. And when we study historical examples of limited government, Africans, or generally we are African nations, can learn from past successes and failures and chart a course towards greater political stability and individual empowerment. So John Locke is one of those people that, when you are trying to understand what limited government is, you'll be meeting him a lot. You need to be able to read his works so that you can, get a deeper insight into it. And of course, you can read some of the books that he has. And yes, of course, the government that governs the least governs the best. And so, the question about what roles the government should play is one that lies at the heart of, debates over limited government. And, libertarians argue that governments primarily, functions should be limited to protecting individual rights and the rest. But in Africa, where governments often struggle to deliver basic services and maintain public trust, a renewed focus on limited government principles can help addressing, pressing challenges while, preserving individual freedoms. And, by streamlining government functions and prioritizing essential services, I think African nations can enhance efficiency and accountability and foster, greater prosperity and social cohesion. And this only happens when they govern less so that the people can benefit. And of course, governments are nothing more than a group of individuals, and as such are only capable of what each individual in the government is capable of. And of course, remember the things that they're capable as individuals within the government, these are things that we as the people have mandated them to do. So at the end of the day, it is nothing more than a group of individuals, as Milton Friedman says. And when you're looking at the principles of limited government, we want to look at how these principles prevent government tyranny, and why is it important to maintain a balance of power within government. Now, central to the concept of limited government, there are key principles such as the separation of powers, checks and balances, and federalism. Now, these principles serve as vital safeguards against the concentration of power, and they also ensure that no single branch of the government becomes too dominant. Now, the U.S. Constitution achieved limited government through a separation of powers, and there was horizontal separation of powers that distributed power among the branches of the government, where we have the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And we all know that the legislature are the lawmakers, and the executive, generally is responsible for executing the laws, and the judiciary is just generally about the courts, and each of which, the three, provide a check on the powers of each other. And there's also vertical separation of powers, which is also known as federalism, which is also part of the principles of limited government, that divided power between a federal government and the state government. Now, separation of powers is a political doctrine originating in the writings of Charles the Secondant, and in which he argues, for a constitutional government with, three separate branches. Each of these branches that we've already spoken about would have defined, abilities to check the powers of each other. Now, this philosophy is heavily influenced. It heavily, influenced the drafting of, most constitutions, according to which the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the government are kept distinct in order to prevent the abuse of power. And mostly separation of powers is associated with the system of check and balance, and which also means that separation of powers is the division of a state's government into branches, and these branches, ideally, they have to put each other, on check. And it can be contrasted with the fusion of powers in monarchies, but also parliamentary and semi-presidential systems, where there can be overlap in memberships and functions between different branches, especially the executive and the legislative. Now, the intention behind a system of separated powers is to prevent the concentration of power by providing for checks and balances. Now, this separation of powers is not only to create an outright limited government, but also to often imprecisely and metonomically be used interchangeably with with the branches. And so while the three branches of the government is a common model or a common type of separation, there are governments that have more or even fewer than these branches. And so now federalism, moving next, is a mode of government that combines a general government, the central the central or federal government, with the regional governments. Here we'll be speaking about, at the provincial, the state, the territorial, or maybe we'll be speaking about counties or other sub-unit governments in a single political system, dividing the powers into two. In Kenya, of course, we know there's the national government, and then there's also the county government, and the powers of these are divided into two. There's that which the national government is mandated to do, and that which the county government is mandated to do. According to the principle of checks and balances, of course, each of these branches, or the three that we're speaking about, of the state, should have the power to limit or check or the other two. So the legislature should be checking on the executive and the judiciary. Judiciary should be checking on the executive and the legislature. And the executive can check on the legislature and the judiciary. And also create a balance between the three separate powers for the state, and each branch's efforts to prevent either of the other branches from becoming supreme from part of an internal conflict, which leaves the people free from government abuses. In the African context, where democratic institutions are still evolving, um, these principles offer a roadmap of strengthening governance, or governance structures, and promoting political stability. And by decentralizing power and fostering accountability, limited governments can empower local communities and foster inclusive decision-making processes, and enhance the resilience of African democracies. And despite its merits, um, limited government faces several challenges, including concerns about um, uh, inequality, market failures, and social welfare. And so, common critics around this could, generally be around those, which is inequality, market failures, and social welfare. And critics argue that without government intervention, vulnerable populations may be left behind, and this could exacerbate social disparities and hinder economic progress. But then, how ideally are we able to address these challenges while advocating for limited government? When you will be writing about limited government as one of the topics that you're interested in, how are you keen to bring out, how are you keen to address these challenges and ensure that you still get to be able to advocate for limited government? And what role do you think that, even when you are writing about limited government, what role do you think civil societies play in addressing societal issues in a limited government framework? How best can we incorporate the activities of civil societies so that they can be able to address the societal issues that would ideally be one of those things that people would think would pick as a criticism against limited government. And of course, I think where issues of poverty and equality remain, when issues around poverty and inequality remain pervasive for us here in Africa or even in Kenya, finding the right balance between limited government and social welfare is paramount. And when we embrace innovative solutions such as social entrepreneurship and community-based initiatives, we are able to address this kind of societal challenges while also preserving individual liberties and ensure that no one is left behind in the pursuit for progress. But again, before we move deeper, one of the primary concerns that are raised by critics is the potential for markets failure and economic inequalities in the absence of government intervention. And most of the time they argue that without regulations and social safety nets, vulnerable populations may be left behind. And another challenge to limited government is generally just the risk of political instability and you know authoritarianism. And without strong institutions and a robust rule of law, limited government can become a facade for unchecked power and tyranny. This is particularly relevant in regions where democratic norms are fragile, and leaders may exploit the principle of limited government to consolidate power and suppress dissent. And in Africa, where democratic transitions are often marred by corruption and human rights abuses, the challenge of ensuring accountable governance while preserving individual liberties is paramount. Now, limited government tries to advocate, or generally advocates, and advocates and stresses the importance of strengthening democratic institutions, promoting transparency, and empowering civil society to hold governments accountable for their actions. And furthermore, it also faces opposition from entrenched interest and bureaucratic, inertia. And governments or government agency and special interest groups may resist efforts to reduce their power, streamline regulations, fearing loss of influence or funding. Resistance can pose significant obstacles to implementing reforms aimed at limiting government overreach and promoting economic freedom. Like I was stating about, what it takes to be able to register a company and to register a business in Kenya. There are a lot of steps that one needs to take. And when we have these special interest groups that may resist to if efforts to reduce their power and streamline regulations. At the end of the day, there's because they might be fearing, their income or losing funding and all. This kind of resistance can pose a lot of obstacles to implementing reforms aimed at ensuring that the powers that the government has is or are limited, and that the people are able to generally just able to just live free, and they're able to have a conducive environment for operating. And despite these challenges, proponents of limited government remain optimistic about its potential to foster prosperity and individual empowerment. And when we advocate for limited government principles and promote innovative solutions, we are dearly going to be able to address some of these challenges. And that is where you're supposed to be coming in with what you'll be writing about. And are you going to be able to advocate for reforms or advocate for changes in structures, in procedures that need to be taken. What is it that you have in your mind that you think you can write about in relation to limited government? Are you able to pick up something that is contemporary, something that is currently happening? Maybe get to see a certain government official or a certain political leader overstretching their powers and stepping on other people and doing things, or generally just disrespecting the rule of law. How are you able to come up with innovative solutions? How are you able to come up with ideas that are going to be addressing these kinds of things in your writing? Are you able to as well just give examples, give evidences, and back it up with evidence? Because at the end of the day, without evidence, then it's all rumors, it's all propaganda. And when speaking about writing, ideally, when I was looking at writing op-eds, op-eds are platforms for expressing ideas and influencing public discourse. And when try and shift or in trying to shift our focus to practical applications of limited government principles, op-eds are one of the most powerful tools for advocacy. They can as well be called opinion editorial, because they allow individuals to express their views on pressing issues and influence public opinion. And in Africa, where at least by now freedom, is often under threat, writing op-eds can be, a potent of activism, also in raising awareness and the importance of limited government and individual freedoms. And by crafting persuasive arguments grounded in libertarian principles, individuals, you ideally can spark meaningful dialogue and drive positive change within your communities and beyond. Now, as powerful tools for advocating for limited government principles and also shaping public opinions, you need to be able to, have, key strategies that are essential for, writing about this. And of course, I know these are some of the things that you're going to be meeting in one of the sessions you'll be having. But just to remind you that you need to be able to craft a compelling argument. And this you can achieve by, um, begin by clearly articulating your main argument or your statement, and use persuasive language and compelling evidence to support your claims and engage readers' interest from the onset. And you also need to be able to provide context and background. Ideally, offer this means to you should be able to offer relevant context and background information to help your readers understand the issue at hand. Explain why limited government principles are relevant to the topic and how they can address societal challenges. And also, you need to address counter engagement. You need to be able to anticipate and address potential counter engagements to your position, because not everybody will be reasoning and thinking like you. Not everybody will be taking your angle or your perspective of view. And so, anticipate counter arguments, anticipate critics, but then how are you going to be addressing them? Addressing these kinds of things. And so acknowledge that opposing viewpoints demonstrate intellectual honesty. And also they strengthen your argument by, refuting potential objections. And when you are trying to address them, of course, always ensure that you put your feelings out of it and address them with facts. And then while you also address them with facts, offer solutions. You need to propose practical solutions or policy recommendations grounded in limited government principles. And you need to highlight how these solutions can address the underlying causes of the issue and offer tangible benefits to the society, while you use clear and concise language. Because when you write in a clear and concise language that is accessible to a broad audience, your work will be read easily. So that would mean you need to avoid jargons or technical terms that may confuse readers and distract or detract from your message. And that would mean that one, you also need to know who exactly is your audience. Who are you expecting to read your article? And with a call to action. And most of the time, it's advisable that you get to conclude your opinion editorial or your op-ed with a compelling call to action. Meaning, you need to encourage readers to take concrete steps to support limited government principles. That really needs to come out, because at the end of the day, you have introduced what you want to talk about. You have given them facts. You've given them relevant examples. You have proposed or offered solutions. Now, what next? You need to have a call to action. Now, whether it's contacting, elected officials, or joining advocacy groups, or spreading awareness on social media, you need to be able to end by empowering your readers to make a difference. Because at the end of the day, then there's ideally nothing that you've done. And so when you go through and you try and follow some of those guidelines and more that you'll be getting from this session, you can be able to craft, persuasive op-eds that effectively communicate libertarian ideas and advocate for limited government principles. And you also need to remember that your voice matters. And op-ed writing is one of those powerful platforms for influencing public discourse and driving change. And the ideas or the way you can write about this are endless and unlimited. I mean, from healthcare to education and to criminal justice reform, limited government principles have mirrored applications in addressing contemporary challenges. And by applying these principles to real world issues, you can advocate for policy reforms that enhance individual freedom and promote justice. Uh, you know, while we are still struggling, or our governments are still struggling to grapple with complex social and economic issues, limited government should be able to offer compelling framework to foster innovation and empowering communities. And when you try and champion for decentralized solutions and grassroots initiatives, you are ideally championing for building more resilient societies, and you are also, this resilient society that can prioritize individual liberties and collective, well-being. Now, think about brainstorm about ideas of libertarian perspective, and maybe consider the pressing issues in your community or nation, and think about how you think limited government can offer innovative solutions. And as you think through it, remember you need to be able to focus on compelling arguments, or ideally crafting compelling arguments. There needs to be evidence that support your arguments and logic. And your op-ed needs to have the potential to spark meaningful conversations and inspire positive change. Do you already have an idea? And well, if you already have it, then of course, let's now get to see you put it down on paper. And as I conclude, um, uh, limited government is not just a theoretical concept, it's a guiding principle with real world implications for societies around the globe, including Africa. And by embracing libertarian ideals and advocating for limited government, we can play a pivotal role in shaping a future that prioritizes individual liberties, economic freedom, and social justice. And so you need to continue exploring libertarian ideas and engage in public discourse to ensure that you're able to play this pivotal role in shaping the future that you want, as well. What are some of these actionable, steps that you can take to promote limited government principles in your communities? These are things that you need to be thinking about in your next exercises in the op-eds that you'll be writing. And as you continue your journey, I am ideally going to encourage you to stay engaged, stay informed, and stay inspired. Now, whether through op-ed writing, or through community activism or political advocacy, each of us has the power to make a difference and build a better world, based on limited government and based on ideally what we want to do. And so we hope that you get to make the world or shape the future through op-ed writing, and that you are going to pick ideas, which are very, very many. You can pick ideas on healthcare, criminal justice reform, leadership and governance, and the economic part of it all, of taxation and all, and even property rights, the rule of law. These are some of the things that you can continue engaging yourself in. You can continue engaging in exploring those kinds of ideas and find what works the best for you, so that you can write about them. That is it from me in this session, and I hope you did get to learn something, and I'm looking forward to the pieces that you will be writing. Thank you.